You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
For a country that has a lot to worry about the repercussions of its humongous population, we seem to have hit a positive demographic milestone. According to the findings of the NFHS-5 or the National Family Health Survey data, India's total fertility rate has declined from 2.2 to 2 in 5 years, which means the average number of children per child bearer is now at 2 at a national level. Another finding from the survey that is being pompously celebrated is that for the first time in the history of NFHS surveys, the sex ratio is skewed in favour of women. The data suggests that there are 1020 women for every 1000 men. And most states and union territories seem to have that trend, barring a few. So the two questions that come up are, firstly, do these numbers indicate that India is closer to stabilizing its population? And secondly, given the continued prevalence of patriarchal attitudes in Indian society, gender preferences for children at birth, and the overall condition of malnutrition in the country, how do we really read the sex ratio figures? We have three guests in today's episode to analyze the NFHS-5 data for us and to really give us the fine print of it all. Sanghamitra Singh, Senior Manager of Knowledge Management and Partnerships at Population Foundation of India, Dr. Srinath Reddy, President of Public Health Foundation of India, and Varna Sri Raman, Lead of Research and Knowledge Building at Oxfam. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you. This is your host, Shorbori. Discussions on India's population boom routinely ends up being in the center stage, sometimes over the prevalence of Hindutva myths around population growth, sometimes over controversial and coercive policies by governments to control population. But it's certainly a fact that so much of the country's development and its health hinges on population stabilization measures. For long, the target has been to arrive at a total fertility rate of 2.1 at a national level, but data from Phase 2 of NFHS-5, which was conducted between 2019 and 2021, shows that we have done better, in fact. As I've said, the total fertility rate, or TFR, is currently at 2. This figure, many have also pointed out, is lower than the replacement level fertility rate, which indicates the level of fertility at which a population replaces itself from one generation onto the next one. And a replacement rate below 2.1 means that a generation is not producing enough children to replace itself, which can even lead to population reduction. The survey findings also indicate a notable increase in the use of modern contraceptives from 53.5% between 2015 to 16 to 66.7% between 2019 to 21. Well, that's impressive progress. As always, the devil is in the detail. A closer look at the data shows that female sterilization is still more popular than other methods, including male sterilization, which of course indicates that the onus of family planning still lies with women. Yet, is the fall in TFR good news? Well, it certainly is a very significant feat. But Sanghamitra Singh from Population Foundation of India says that it's not really unexpected.
So we were kind of expecting India to reach replacement level fertility, which is actually 2.1. So fertility rate of 2.1 means that on an average people are having two children. You know, that 0.1 additional 0.1 is more to account for mortality and other related factors, but India's replacement level, India's total fertility rate as per the previous round of NFHS, which was NFHS-4, was already 2.2. So now this, for us to reach 2 is actually not surprising. I think most demographers were expecting that.
We know that India is poised to take over China's population and become the most populated nation in the world by a couple more decades or so. And so the enthusiasm around the low TFR is understandable. But does this finding actually mean that we have achieved our population stabilization goals? Ms. Singh explains why this process of stabilization may still take a few more decades.
Stabilization means that the number, the overall population of the country, that number is remaining stagnant. India also has a large young population right now. So even though the fertility rate has reached 2, the young population, they will continue to have children till sort of our average age becomes a little higher and more people are out of that reproductive, bracket. So it'll still take around 30 to 40 years for the population to stabilize itself. So that's going to still take some time. It's going to take another 30, 40 years, which is what most projections have also said. But we've reached replacement level fertility, which means that we've begun that process. So, just reaching replacement level fertility would not mean that, the population growth would just immediately stop. It's a gradual process.
The other important finding that is getting enthusiastic responses is the fact that the proportion of women for the first time seems to have exceeded men. In NFHS-3, if you remember, which was conducted between 2005 to 6, the ratio was equal. It was 1,000 women for every 1,000 men. Then it slipped down to 991 women for every 1,000 men in NFHS-4, conducted between 2015 and 16. So, for a country like India, which has a history of female feticide and postnatal sex selection that has led to an estimation of 46 million girl children going missing due to sex selection as per the United Nations Population Fund data, an indication of the sex ratio being skewed in favor of women quite obviously holds a lot of value. But, again, the devil is in the detail. While the integrity of the NFHS data is not in question, the question really is, do the sex ratio figures show the full picture? Varna Sriraman of Oxfam India points out three things. One, that the sex ratio at birth, which is a more refined way to read demographic trends, still stands at 929 to 1000. This means that India continues to show a son preference. Two, we still don't have a disaggregated data on the basis of state, districts, gender or caste, so there's no way to know if the subgroups are doing well in these ratios or not. And three, although the NFHS data has been a reliable source, it's still a sample survey. So it's really the census data that can reflect a surer picture.
So, I think, look, this is like a case of eternal optimism where necessarily we don't have like full figures and data to be able to actually celebrate about it. Certainly on the face of it, improved sex ratios are a good thing. But what I think is important to remember is that this is an improved sex ratio. It's not an improved child sex ratio at birth, right? These are two different measures. And this is really what like the government likes to do, which is to kind of report one thing and sort of hide the truth behind the other. The child sex ratio at birth for the last 5 years, which is really the area of concern around PCP and DT and infanticide and feticide for the girl child, is actually still pretty bad. And so therefore, in this country, we still have like a son preference for sure. Does mean is that perhaps our women have been surviving for longer now. And this is like a demographic kind of trend, much like the other demographic trend which has been celebrated in NHFS. The other thing I think which is important to remember is that the data that has been released is right now not unit level data. So when I say unit level data, meaning we don't have like household level data. We don't have state level data. We don't have disaggregated data by gender or by caste or whatever. So even all these improvements that are there, we don't know whether these subgroups are actually doing well on these ratios or not. And is it the country as a whole? So certainly, I feel like population control work, at least the way that it has happened in India, has been a very, very long battle, 20 years or more. And much of that, I think, has succeeded. In some sense, it's a vindication of that, which I think is a good thing. But there's a lot also for the government to think about in that, like perhaps we really don't need like a draconian population control policy. The other thing to also remember is that, when you look at like the state level figures around this, there are Bihar's rate hasn't changed. UP hasn't changed. A lot of the traditionally populous states, nothing has happened much over there. So yes, we should think that we are moving in the right direction. But I don't know whether we should be out in the streets celebrating. I also think the other thing is that while NHFS is a really solid data set, many things like PFR and all of these ratios that are being talked about are actually much more robust at the census level, right? Where there is where there is an enumeration, because NHFS, no matter how good or great and this thing it is, it's still a sample survey, right? And a sample survey is not a patch on a census.
And like Ms. Raman, Dr. Srinath Reddy, President of Public Health Foundation of India, also reiterates that a sample survey has an inherent frailty in terms of the total numbers. And he also had some really interesting observations in his analysis. He says that if we're to take the figures at face value, the contribution to the improved sex ratio seems to be coming from the rural area. Listen in.
You cannot take it only as absolute numbers. So that happens in any survey where you have taken only a sample of the overall population. You have to also put in the confidence limits and see whether the confidence limits are very wide or narrow or overlapping or not. However, if you take these values as they are presented at face value, these estimates, then it appears, yes, overall you are seeing an improved sex ratio, but the contribution to that improvement, interestingly, comes from the rural areas. The sex ratio is still skewed in urban areas. And if you are looking at the total fertility rate, which is thought to be 2, then you find that the total fertility rate is 2.1, which is the replacement ratio in rural areas, but 1.6 in urban areas. So one question that arises, which needs to be looked into with deeper analysis, is the sex ratio still less than 1,000 in urban areas, where the total fertility rate is also reported to be low? Is that because there is a much greater gender preference among urban population, particularly the middle class, as opposed to the rural area where the gender preference may not be so strong, and therefore the sex ratio is fine, and the total fertility rate is still 2.1. So one has to really look at both of these and see whether there's a relationship or not. I mean, that's still a hypothesis that needs to be explored. But I believe that it's the census that will give us much better figures on the sex ratio, though in terms of the fertility rate also, we'll get greater clarity then. But at least face value, it appears that the total fertility rate of 2 appears that we have definitely reached the population stabilization rate.
While the headlines are focusing on the positive trends, there are also some really deep areas of concerns from the NFHS findings. For instance, the proportion of anemic children increased from 58% to 67%. The number of anemic women and girls aged between 15 to 49 years of age increased from 53% to 57%. And for men of the same age, it increased from 29% to 31%. When it comes to undernutrition, there was also very marginal improvement there. And another alarming finding is that higher instances of domestic and sexual violence have been reported during the COVID-19 mandated lockdown period. Speaking on these factors, Ms. Raman says that beyond just the positive trends, there's also a need to have whole life approaches to manage public health.
Absolutely. No, I think I agree with you that there's plenty in the data for us to be concerned about. Like there's a drop in malnutrition, anemia has gone up, which is like a terrible thing. I think what sort of we need to look at is that, you need to have kind of like what is called like life cycle or whole life approaches to kind of managing public health as opposed to kind of like only small things. So, for example, one of the things that NHS also tells us is that there are more women who have completed schooling, but that's not being accompanied by greater labor force participation. So maybe, headlines are saying that the missing women girls problem is over, but women are still missing from the workforce, right? So really you can't, I think what one needs to learn is that policy can't be kind of like sorted in like a piecemeal fashion, right? You need to take like a whole life cycle approach for the woman, for the man. In fact, even why women? I mean, like the body mass index and undernutrition is a problem that is like in NHS even for men.
And that's all for this episode. Stay tuned to The Big Story Monday to Friday. This is your host, Shorbori. If you like listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story playlist for episodic updates. We're live on Apple, Google Podcast, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website and check out the podcast section. For any feedback, shoot an email to podcasts@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint website and check out our other podcasts.